Hijacked buildings. It's a huge issue. As I said, you used to be the former ward councillor for Ward 27. Those Berea Morningside areas, there are a number of abandoned and hijacked buildings. They are a huge eyesore to the community. But also in the Durban inner city, it's a huge hijacked buildings are a big issue. Not as big as Johannesburg. How much, what are you doing to make sure that, Durban does not become another Johannesburg in terms of this issue with hijacked buildings?
And unfortunately, up to now, Public Works was part of the problem, not part of the solution, in that we own some of those abandoned buildings, West Point, Palm Beach Hotel, and a couple of other examples. So there's three things currently happening. The first thing that we're very excited about is on the 18th and 19th of November, we'll be having our Build KZN Better conference. We'll be inviting local government, private sector, NGOs, groups like the Durban Business Chamber, and so forth. And we're going to put all our properties on the table and say, all right, let's find solutions together. Let's see, what can we do with these buildings? How can we improve them? How can we bring the private sector in to make sure these abandoned buildings get a use that still benefits the people of the city and of KwaZulu-Natal? eThekwini is going to be a major role player in this conference as well. And that conference will then launch imagining how we use buildings in the province. We've also sat down with municipalities. I've started meetings. I've had meetings with eThekwini, with Umtlathuze, and other municipalities, and quite a few are coming up. And we sat with them and said, listen, these are the buildings we own in your municipality. Let's find solutions together. And I mentioned West Point, which is a very infamous building on the embankment. If you go out of the harbour, it's the first thing you see. It's a terribly burned pink building there. When people come in cruise ships to our city, that's the first thing they see when they leave the harbour. It's terrible. That belonged to the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure. So eThekwini said to us, all right, they have a plan for that building. They want to change it into social housing and all other types of things. So we've handed that building over to them, which is our legal right to do. We said, okay, we're not going to charge you for it. The building is now yours. You have to have a certain plan. We give you a time frame to do it, and we're going to help them to envision it. So we are working very actively. We are busy with a full audit of all properties belonging to the department. We're about 80% through that audit. And then we're going to look at what we own and say, all right, there's three things. First of all, can we reuse it for government, repurpose it? So we're paying a fortune in leasing office space for government departments, yet we own buildings. So can we change that building so we can move a government department out of a building we lease and put it into a building we actually own? That's the first step. The second step is, can we bring NGOs and NPOs into this building so it benefits the people? And a good example there is in rural areas, we own hundreds of schools that's no longer being used because of the depopulation of the rural areas. These schools are now standing empty. That belongs to the department. Can we put in NGOs there to have a one-stop service to that community, or a skill center, or whatever the case might be? So that's the second step. And then the third step is, if we can't use any of those, then we're going to sell those buildings or go into long leases with public-private partnerships and find solutions for it. But the mantra is in the department, if anything this department owns doesn't benefit the public of KwaZulu-Natal, we shouldn't own it.
And, I get it, the government to government, from Public Works to eThekwini. I just want to speak about the public-private partnerships in terms of when it comes to hijacked buildings. And I think this is the plan we've all heard from not just you, but from all MECs that are in provinces where there's a huge issue of hijacked buildings. How much of an appetite is there from the private sector to actually take these hijacked buildings or abandoned buildings, or maybe badly run buildings, and actually turn them into something viable? Is there an appetite from the private sector?
Since I started talking about it, we've had so much people approaching us. And they mentioned, as I said earlier, they mentioned the regulations being a challenge for them. The other thing is that in the past, government would come and say, we want this, private sector come in. It didn't suit the private sector's needs, so they said, no, we're not going to get involved. We're changing the narrative. We're saying, listen, this is the building. This is the minimum we want out of this property. Private sector, what can you bring? What do you think should happen to this building? And this is what we're going to do at this conference as well. Let them come with the suggestions, because they understand the market, they understand the needs. And they will come and say, listen, we want to use the building for this. And we say, all right, but this is the minimum that we need to get out of it to benefit the public. And I'll give an example that we visited a project in Cape Town recently that is run there by the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure in the Western Cape, where a private company is building this beautiful whole thing. It's a housing and shops and a school, and everything is built there. And a certain percentage of it is reserved for social housing. So the government will run at the social housing, but it's all built by the private sector, and the rest they will rent out and they will get their profit from it. They do that in London as well. Any new apartment block that you build in London, a certain percentage of those flats must be reserved for social housing. It's rules there now. So that's what we will do, for instance. Let's say at the Palm Beach Hotel, which is an empty, abandoned hotel in the South Beach, we're going to go to the public sector and say, come with suggestions. What do you think should happen? But we want 2 or 3 floors of that must be available for social housing or student housing, whatever the case might be, so that we get something, a benefit out of it. We don't sell the building to them. We give it to them as a long-term lease. The rest, they can then do what they need to do. Or if we say there's office blocks that we own that's abandoned, and we can go to the private sector and say, all right, you develop this as an office block. You give us 2 floors that we then put government departments in lease-free, and you take the others and rent it out privately. So I think there's a lot of appetite amongst private sector now for it. Even from foreign companies, we're getting people coming to us and saying, listen, we want to get more involved. So I think now that we have a stable government, KwaZulu-Natal, now that people see things are moving forward, and now that we are committed to making it easier for private business to work with us, as long as the people of the province benefits from it, I think we're going to see forward movement.